All right. Okay, let's review what we learned yesterday in chapters 1 and 2, just so we can remember what we read. Okay, because again, if you're not fully engaged or paying attention, you're probably going to feel a little bit lost as we keep going through the story. So we have Naya in 2008 and Salva in 1985. Okay, we're comparing and contrasting their two stories, like how they're both kind of struggling with the water, how they're going to get the water. Okay, what's the same and what's different in the end. Okay. So we only have heard from Naya a little bit. Her chapters were like tiny, right? Just very small. Or her part of the chapter was very small yesterday. Okay. Her one today actually gets a little bit longer. And then from Salva, we've heard about the war between North and South Sudan. I wanted to show you this real quick. I forgot to show you yesterday. In the front of the book, here's a map. Let me focus. There we go. So if you look, so we're in Africa, as you know. Okay, and it zooms in on this part that's boxed in, which is Sudan. We have Northern Sudan, and then Southern Sudan. This is who's having a war. Okay, this map key says Salva's route. This is where he walked. So here's South Sudan. He goes all the way over to Ethiopia, and then all the way down to Kenya. Okay, put your chair down. Put your chair down. That's what we read in the Real Kids book. Okay. Okay, let's read chapter 3 and see what we can add to Naya and then Salva. Okay. All right, chapter 3, Southern Sudan, 2008. So we read about she got a thorn in her foot, walking to get the water. The smudge on the horizon gained color as Naya drew nearer, changing from hazy gray to olive green. The dirt under her feet turned to mud, then sludge, until at last she was ankle deep in water. There was always so much life around the pond. Other people, mostly women and girls who had come to fill their own containers, many kinds of birds, all flap and twitter and caw, herds of cattle that had been brought to the good grazing by the young boys who looked after them. So much life. She's going to the pond. There's lots of things around the pond. Naya took the hollowed gourd that was tied to the handle of the plastic container. She untied it, scooped up the brown muddy water, and drank it. It took 2 gourdfuls before she felt a little cooler inside. Don't mess with the wrapper, okay? It's loud. Put the wrapper down. There you go. You're right by the camera. Naya filled the container all the way to the top. Then she tied the gourd back in place and took the padded cloth donut from her pocket. The donut, I'll show you, we're not talking about an actual donut, okay? The donut went on her head first, followed by the heavy container of water, which she would hold in place with one hand. With the water balanced on her head and her foot still sore from the thorn, Naya knew that going home would take longer than coming had. But she might reach home by noon if all went well. So that's like, again, kind of like this picture. If you look really closely, you can almost see the little faint outline of what would be like a donut shape. So she's putting this on her head to help hold the water so the jug is not just pressing on top of her skull. Okay. 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 Let me get my pen. All right, so Naya, she gets to pond, gets water. Okay. Perfect. Okay. Let's look back and see where we left off with Salva. He stayed at that barn, right? They were looking for a place to stay. They found the barn to stay in. He wakes up and he's alone. Something felt wrong. He was alone. Okay. Okay, so let's see what happens to him next. All right, 1985. The tears were hot in Salva's eyes. Where had everyone gone? What?
I think you know why they left.
Okay.
Because he probably woke up too late and they probably didn't want to get found. They wanted to keep moving, so they didn't bother doing it because that would take time. They wanted to get out as fast as they can.
Okay, let's see. The tears were hot in Salva's eyes. Where had everyone gone? Why had they left without waking him? He knew the answer. Because he was a child, who might tire easily and slow them down, and complain about being hungry and cause trouble somehow. So remember, with the group of women and children, he was the only child, besides there was a baby. Okay. I would not have been any trouble. I would not have complained. What will I do now? Salva took a few steps to see what he could see. On the far horizon, the sky was hazy from the smoke of the bombs. About 100 paces in front of him, he could see a small pond. Between the pond and the barn was a house, and yes, a woman sitting in the sun. Holding his breath, he crept closer until he could see her face clearly. The ritual scar patterns on her forehead were familiar. They were Dinka patterns, which meant that she was from the same tribe as Salva. Salva let out his breath in relief. He was glad that she was not Nuer. The Nuer and the Dinka, so the two tribes, had a long history of trouble. No one, it seemed, was sure where Nuer land ended and Dinka land began. So each tribe tried to lay claim to the areas richest in water. So here's land. You have the Nuer and the Dinka, and they're kind of fighting over this part's our land, this part's our land, but they both want the land with the most water.
You're reading from Pebble Dust. What did you find?
Oh no. Oops. Okay. Over the years, there had been many battles, large and small, between Dinka and Nuer. Many people on both sides had been killed. This was not the same as the war that was going on now between the rebels and the government. The Dinka and the Nuer had been fighting each other for hundreds of years, so two different fights. The woman looked up and saw him. Salva flinched at her glance. Would she be friendly? Or to a stranger? Would she be angry with him for spending the night in her barn? But at least he was not alone now, and that knowledge was stronger than the uncertainty about what the woman might do or say to him. He walked toward her. "Good morning, Auntie," he said, his voice trembling. He doesn't know who it is. I know we hear the word, aunt or aunt, as our family member. I think that might just be a term of like good morning, ma'am. Same thing. Okay. She nodded at him. She was old, much older than Salva's mother. He kept quiet, waiting for her to speak. "You must be hungry," she said at last. She stood and went into the house. A few moments later, she came back out and gave him 2 handfuls of raw peanuts. Then she sat down again. "Thank you, Auntie." Squatting on his haunches next to her, Salva shelled the peanuts and ate them. He chewed every piece into a paste before he swallowed, trying to make each one last as long as he could. Why? Why is he trying to make each little tiny peanut last as long as he could? Elise?
Because they're so small and he hasn't had food in such a long time.
They're very small. He hasn't had food in a long time. And, Lucian?
There's a limited food.
He doesn't know when he'll get food again, so he's trying to savor it. The woman sat without speaking until he was finished. Then she asked, "Where are your people?" Salva opened his mouth to speak, but his eye filled with tears again, and he couldn't answer. She frowned. "Are you an orphan?" He shook his head quickly. For a moment, he felt almost angry. He was not an orphan. He had a father and a mother. He had a family. "I was at school. I ran away from the fighting. I do not know where my family is." She nodded. "A bad thing, this war. What are you going to do? How will you find them?" Salva had no answer. He had hoped that the woman might have some answers for him. After all, she was an adult. Instead, she had only questions. Everything was upside down. Everything was upside down. What does that mean? Based on what I just read, everything was upside down. You really? Confusing. He's like, this adult should have answers for me because I have questions, but the adult is just as confused and has questions. So she doesn't have any information to provide him. Okay, I don't know if we talked about this yesterday, but I want you to notice that these larger spaces in between some of the paragraphs, these all go together. These larger spaces signal sometimes a setting change or a time pass, okay, that you would have to infer something that happened in this space. Okay, just so you know, that's in all books. Okay, so Salva stayed in the woman's barn again that night. He began to make a plan. Maybe I can stay here until the fighting stops. Then I will go back to my village and find my family. He worked hard so that she would not send him away. For 3 days he fetched firewood from the bush and water from the pond, but the pond was drying up. Each day it was harder to fill the gourds. During the daytime, Salva could hear the distant booming of artillery from the fighting a few miles away. With every shell that exploded, he would think of his family, hoping they were safe, wondering desperately when he would be with them again. On the 4th day, the old woman told him that she was leaving. You have seen that the pond is only a puddle now. Winter is coming, and the dry season, and this fighting. She nodded her head in the direction of the noise. I will go to a different village near water. You cannot stay with me any longer. Salva stared at her as panic rose inside him. Why can't I go with her? The woman spoke again before he could ask aloud. The soldiers will leave me alone, an old woman on her own. It would be more dangerous for me to travel with you. She shook her head in sympathy. I'm sorry, I cannot help you any more, she said. Wherever it is you walk, just be sure to walk away from the fighting. Salva stumbled back to the barn. What will I do? Where will I go? The words repeated themselves 1,000 times in his head. It was so strange. He had known the old woman for only a few days, but now he could not imagine what he would do when she was gone. He sat inside the barn and stared out, looking at nothing. As the light grew dimmer, the noises of evening began, the buzz of insects, the rustling of dry leaves, and another sound. Voices? Salva turned his head toward the sound. Yes, it was voices. Some people were walking toward the house, a small group, fewer than a dozen. As they approached, Salva took a sharp breath. In the fading light, he could see the faces of those nearest him. 2 of the men had patterns of V-shaped scars on their foreheads. Dinka patterns again, the kind that were given to the boys in Salva's village as part of the ritual of becoming a man. These people were Dinka too. Could his family be among them? Okay. I know, sorry, I know. Okay. Okay, so what's important to write about Salva now? What's important to write about Salva now, Imani?
That he made like his family and he's seeing other Dinkas.
Okay, so he's starting to see other people from the tribe, and then the old woman did help him for a little bit, but then she said, I'm sorry, you can't come with me. If they see you with me, it's more dangerous. So I'm leaving you. So he got help for a little bit, okay? More Dinka tribe people, woman from barn helped him. I'm gonna write this again. We wrote it yesterday, but he keeps talking about it. Family? Family? Am I gonna find my family?